I am a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified sex therapist. I've been in practice now for about 8 years, working as a therapist, but the last 2 years I've gone into private practice. So I specialize in working with queer and BIPOC folks, so people of color, and I pretty much range in the focus from depression, anxiety, trauma, but I'm very passionate about sex therapy in specific, which is why I did the additional work to get certified. I love to talk about sex. I love to talk about pleasure. I love to help folks also explore, but learn about themselves, their bodies, and also dismantling a lot of, I think, stigma and shame that's still very much attached to sex and sexuality in our bodies. So that's pretty much in a nutshell what I do. I also host my own podcast where I talk about these topics and additional topics related to the queer community. And I'm also a model. So I do a lot of fashion, work with a lot of designers, queer primarily designers, and have done a couple of fashion shows and have a lot of other projects in the work. So I'm all about self-expression and, just helping folks really find themselves and learning to love themselves.
I love that so much. Helping folks learn to find themselves and love themselves. That is so important, especially in this day and age. I feel like life has become so chaotic that if you're not centered in who you really are and you're not loving yourself through this, I mean,
It's
life can
tough.
be hard. Yeah.
It is. And I think the other thing too is that we're constantly bombarded, right, with messages that tell us not to love ourselves, right? You need this, you need to look this way, you need to act this way, you need to use this product. I mean, it's a constant bombardment, right? And so I think all of those things are great because they're things we can use to enhance our beauty, to be at our best selves. But at the same time, we have to do the internal work, right, to really get to the bottom of it. So these things are tools and not things that we need to justify being lovable or being beautiful. So.
That was so well and beautifully said. Thank you for that. Seriously, that was really beautifully said. At the start of our call, you mentioned that aside from being a sex therapist, marriage and family counselor, you love to talk about sex and pleasure. And I can tell that you have really given yourself permission to talk about sex and to explore your pleasure. My question for you is, how did you find the permission to do that in a world that is so uncomfortable with sexuality and pleasure, and especially people who have really taken ownership of those things for themselves?
And that's it. I love that question because there's so many layers to it. First of all, I don't think that we're actually too shy to talk about sexuality because it's everywhere, right? We see it on billboards, we see it in ads, we see it in fashion, we see it in food. I mean, we see it everywhere. That's not the problem. The problem is actually talking about it. Like, we want to see it and we know it's in films, we know it's in music, we all consume it, but we don't actually find empowerment in it. Instead, it's almost like it's okay in a certain way, but then in other ways it's not, and I grew up in a very religious conservative home where we did not talk about our bodies, we did not talk about sex. And most of the time when we talked about our bodies, it was almost made it seem like it was disgusting or gross, right? Like, like you shouldn't, touch yourself there. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't like show this or that. And especially for women, I am half Guatemalan, half Mexican. My family is Christian. And so I was raised in an evangelist home. And a lot of those values were pushed onto me. So it was really a journey of liberation, self-discovery, but also really embracing my queerness and my identity as a gay man that allowed me to really see the world very differently. And instead of shame and stigma, I started to see colors, right? I started to see that there was a lot more to it, that we're human. We enjoy pleasure. We're hardwired for it. Our bodies love touch. I mean, we're social creatures. We love to be around people. We love connecting. The problem is not all of these other things that people find, with sex or any of that. It's that we're not taught or even told how to engage in these ways and how to enjoy pleasure. Instead, we're shamed. We're told that sex is a certain kind of power dynamic rather than actually focusing on the fact that it's about connection, right? And I think that is one of the biggest things that I find with a lot of my clients and a lot of folks that I work with is shame, right? This internalized message that they got about what it means to be sexual creatures, right? Oh, it's not okay for me to like this. I'm not supposed to enjoy that. I'm not supposed to, masturbate. I'm not supposed to look at myself in this way or dance. Even dancing, like some folks have come to me and shared that I wasn't allowed to dance because it was giving my body pleasure, and that was a no-no. I mean, so there's so many messages that we get in general, and yet sex is everywhere. It's not like it's a hidden thing. So I think it's a very complex question when it comes to sex and society. But for me personally, it really was a journey. I think there was a lot of shame for me when I first came out as a gay man, and when I started to explore, no one had talked to me, like I said, about sex. I actually didn't even know about masturbation until I was about 21, 22 years old, because yeah, no one had talked to me about it. And I was sitting there like, what are you talking about? What is that? Until someone shared with me and they talked to me about ejaculation. And I was like, what? And like the first time, I don't know, this is TMI, but I know we're talking about sex. And so obviously I'm going to dismantle stigmas. The first time I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know our bodies could do this. And so that was the level of shame that was really pushed on me around sexuality in my body, that when I started to connect with other men and really try to engage in intimacy, there was a lot of almost like this automatic, like physical response of like, am I doing something wrong? Is there something, almost the messages coming in, and yet it feeling good and feeling guilty because it felt good. And so it was a lot of unlearning, and definitely my own therapy, my own conversations with friends, healthy relationships that I did have with men throughout my life. And then just going into this field, I think for me, the biggest motivator was that I was really exhausted of hearing so much taboo and so many negative messages, especially in my community as a Latino and as a queer person, and how it was demonized, right? Because especially with queer folks, we've been at the forefront of pleasure and sex and kinks and all of these things, and yet we've been demonized for it. Right? We've been told like that is what it makes us shameful and bad, that we enjoy sexuality and freedom. And yet it's such a crucial part of being queer and being, part of the LGBTQ plus community, that we can't escape our bodies, our sexuality. It's already put on our forehead, like this, you're gay, like sexuality, you enjoy this. And it's taboo and stigmatized. And so I think in that sense, there was a very unique process for me to really let go of a lot of these things, because I wasn't just dealing with the stigma and shame of sexuality in general. I was dealing with the stigma and shame of gay sex and sexuality, and also gender and body, and all of these other things that were put on me at a time where I didn't really understand it myself. And so it's been a journey for sure. I've been with my current partner now for 14 years. We've definitely explored many layers. We're very vocal, transparent, and we love to talk with each other about our wants and needs. And I think that's made a huge difference in my relationship, but also the way that I see sex, because I will admit that for a long time, I also held those views. And I was very much someone that was like, oh, like that's bad. You shouldn't do that. Like, oh my gosh, like yada, yada. And it took a lot of like that really deep work to be like, wait a minute, I also enjoy this. I'm also a person. I also like pleasure, and I'm dating, and I'm in these situations, and I need to, also unlearn some of these things that are holding me back from really getting at that intimacy that I want, and that sex that I want, and that pleasure that I want.
So beautiful, so beautiful. You said something that really stuck out to me, which is that sex is about connection. And that is really interesting to me, because leading into something else you said, which is, you should be able to share about your desires, your wants, your vulnerabilities. You and your partner have done that, and it's brought you closer. At Live Jasmin, where we're from, members come onto the platform, and that's essentially what they're doing with models, is they are connecting and finding a way to get certain needs met. And some of these relationships are lasting 15 years, 20 years between the member and the model, where they are still, this member comes to see the same model. And I've always wondered, what is it about the dynamic that creates such a strong bond that 15 years later, they're still interacting.
Mhm.
And my guess is that a big part of it is that vulnerable communication that bonds you to someone because it's connection.
Absolutely. Connection is crucial. It's important. It's the same reason why I could even argue that clients come to see me for a long time because there's a connection, there's trust, there's a level of intimacy. And at the same time, it's protected because it's very unique. And so when I think of something like Jasmin, and this connection that people have, it's really around, like I said, two humans interacting in a way that feels safe and at the same time also provides a need, right? Our need to want to feel seen, our need to want to feel valued and loved and appreciated and desired and all of these other things. And on top of that, there's also this other layer of, when we have a power dynamic, right? In therapy, when we talk about power dynamics, it's really around the ability to have, I guess, a certain role. And so for me, in my work specifically, I actually don't really in, I try to dismantle that idea of power dynamic because in therapy it doesn't work, right? There has to be a level playing field where someone that's coming to see me can collaborate with me and we can do a certain level of work together. In something like Jasmin, I think that there is opportunity for more of a power dynamic where people can play around with it. I want to feel powerful and tell you how to touch your body. I want to feel good. I want to feel submissive and you tell me how to respond to this, and we also enjoy that. And I think that it's important to understand that all of these things are part of being human and they're also part of sexuality and play, right? And even as adults we enjoy these kinds of interactions.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm curious, what do you have any? Let me think of how I want to ask this. Are there any recurrent themes of like a block to that you've seen in your clients where there's this block to them expressing or having a healthy relationship with their sexuality or even their partners?
Yeah, absolutely. It's usually like I said, the fact that they're not used to being openly transparent about sexuality, right? Most couples that I see or people that I work with, when I first meet them, I ask them, have you talked to your partner about this? Have you shared with them? Not really. I don't really feel comfortable. I'm like, oh, well, what comes up for you in sharing this? I don't know how they'll react. I don't know how they'll respond. I don't know if they'll be okay with it, what their comfort is. I also don't know how to bring it up. And so usually it's just starting at the basic part, which is communication, right? That people don't talk about it. They weren't taught to openly talk about. Not everyone. Obviously, there's some folks that do, but the majority of people are not. And so they come in really confused around like, how do they even bring this up to a partner, or how do they even engage in these fantasies or desires, and also obviously like understanding what they mean, right? A lot of people apply so much meaning to these desires, and sometimes fantasy is just fantasy, right? We fantasize about a lot of things, and it doesn't mean that we're acting them out. It just means that there's a fantasy, and I think that's another allure of things like Jasmin, where there is an element of fantasy, right? That is enjoyable. Now, it doesn't mean people act it out. It just means that people might enjoy the idea of seeing it or talking about it, or maybe even getting someone to actually be receptive of it rather than outright like rejecting or shaming them.
One of the biggest criticisms of this industry is that it is some people think it's just exactly the same thing as porn. It's just sexual and it's not the right type of sexual based off of society standards. But when I think about it logically, I think about the fact that there is so much free sexuality everywhere online, and members are paying by the minute essentially to have an experience with someone. Do you think that those people are like it's just about the sexuality for them? Or do you think that maybe even unbeknownst to them, there's something deeper that they're trying to get from that?
Yeah, yeah. I personally feel that we all have a very different experience. There's going to be lots of reasons why people would join. I would say the majority is really the interaction, really going back to what you shared around the connection and being able to feel seen. I think that there's a huge difference with porn, right? Because porn, you're not really engaging. It's usually something you watch. It's usually something that feels more kind of sold to you, right? Whereas I think something like Jasmin definitely offers alternatives, offers people different variations of something where they get to actively engage and connect if that is what they want. And if not, then it's also okay for them to engage in other ways. I think that even when we talk about things like pornography and sex work, there's a huge sense of stigma and shame around it when we're not really discussing like deeper issues, that it's not about people engaging in sex work. It's not about people, doing pornography. It's really around the attitudes and the beliefs that we hold about sex and sexuality that lead to this, right? We can talk about patriarchal systems or machismo in Spanish, or things where we tell men that they're supposed to behave a certain way sexually, or women that they're supposed to behave a certain way sexually. And those are actual bigger issues than it is to let someone who's trying to make an honest living, or who has no option, or who feels safer doing something on cam where they're still getting paid and able to provide for their family. We like to be very big on morals, but we don't really ever get into other people's shoes, right? We just make assumptions. We make a lot of judgments and criticisms, and oftentimes that stems from somewhere deeper inside a lot of us, right? It's that shame that we all get. And so I think that people are going to show up for a lot of different reasons and needs. And of course, there's going to be some folks that abuse it or misuse it. And yet we can't just say that because of that, it's not a good thing. I mean, other people will likely benefit in better ways and healthier ways, and actually be respectful and utilize it as a way of getting connection.
Again, so beautifully said. I'm happy you have a podcast because yeah, you spit fire. It's incredible. Do you have any clients who use camming or who have reported their experience to you? Either they're a member or they're a model?
I have actually had some clients that you tell me they've never specified a service, but they have shared that they use camming services, or have connected with models online. And one of the biggest things that I hear from them in terms of benefits and positives, pros, whatever, is that they like that they can engage and connect with someone and feel seen without being judged. I've had some clients who also share that they use cam services where they're the models and they feel very empowered. I've had someone share with me, I've had a lot of doubts about my gender, my sexuality, but when I'm on there, I can play around and people can come in and I get a lot of compliments and it feels good. And then I can close the laptop and go on with my day and feel encouraged and feel motivated, that I'm able to use this as a tool. In terms of issues, the only thing that I've ever heard up to now, right, and obviously, like I said, it's situational, is the shame associated with it. Like I feel bad. My partner doesn't know, or I don't talk about it, or it's something that, after I'm done, like I can also feel a little bit of that shame popping up. But like I said, this is really societal. This is really the messages that folks learn. This is really the biases that we hold. But in terms of pros, I love hearing my clients share that they felt good about their bodies when they don't usually feel that way in other situations. I love that they share that they could dress up and be themselves, or really play around with that part of their identity that they may decide they don't want to show the world, but they can do it in this form. And it's okay. It feels good. And they are working professionals with families who are there for their families, who are in therapy because they want to be better people. I mean, this is, like I said, it's really depends, but at least in my experience from my clients, I've heard positive uses of it.
Beautiful. What are your thoughts on camming in relation to our sexuality?
Yeah. So when we talk about like sexuality, my biggest thing is really around how we ourselves feel about our body and our relationship to it, right? And so camming is something that really gives people an opportunity to not just express themselves in this way, but also a safe space, right? Obviously, there's going to be a lot of different models with different sexualities and genders and all of these different things. And I think that this is an opportunity for many of them to engage in a safe space. I mean, the other option for many of us is going through something like an app, right? A hooking up app where it's not always safe, where we don't always know who we're talking to, where it's really hit or miss, right, around like connection. Whereas camming, it's really a space where I think people can go and they'll find someone that's wanting to connect, someone that's wanting to be in that space, and they're welcomed in it.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the cam industry is that people have the space to explore their sexuality and explore those fantasies. Like you said, like fantasies are something that we all have, by the way. And
Yeah.
but not all of us are having that permission to explore it or even know that that's an option. So with camming, you have a space where you can explore your sexuality with another human being, but you don't have any risk of catching any STIs or STDs. You don't have any risk of any physical violence or abuse or any safety dangers in that way at all. But
It
you can,
minimizes the risk, right? It minimizes the risk,
yes.
protects the people that are, doing this for work or doing this for pleasure. It allows people to also make it more convenient, safer, right, than having to go out or looking for something in specific, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that it offers, and technology has made it so that we can connect in different ways. Now, I will say that I'm a person who believes that there's always going to be a need for harmony, right? Obviously connecting outside, but also at the same time, technology is a tool. And I think that a lot of us, who don't have access, and this is also going back into like communities that we don't always talk about, like this folks who are disabled, right, that are not able to go out or that do want to enjoy pleasure as well, but don't have access to it. They can go on a computer, on a cam, feel good about their own bodies, and also be able to be on a cam if they'd like to, and have people who actually want to enjoy this interaction with them as well. Many of us, when we grow up with those negative messages, we're going to see ourselves in a very specific way because there's going to be parts of us that want to engage in that way, and we're going to hate those parts, and it creates other types of problems. So yes, I do think that it has outcomes, a variety of them, um, and it also keeps us very much disconnected, right, from embracing a part of ourselves that gives us connection. Like I said, it's about connection, right? It's about communication. Sex is often turned into, like I said, this idea of it's a need, right? I need to get this need met. And it's almost about, it's dehumanized in some ways because that's the shame, right? Instead of seeing it as this is pleasurable, enjoyable, fun, exciting, connected, right, to some other human, it's seen as a mechanical, shameful thing we have to hide. And so people they're gonna find ways.
Yeah, even how you said that, seeing sex as pleasurable, enjoyable, fun, connecting to another human. I think we've all had beautiful, well, hopefully, many of us have had beautiful sexual experiences where we felt those things. But when I think about it and just take it in and, day-to-day life, is that how we actually think about sex? Most of us? Not really. Like as our norm, thinking of it as this beautiful, fun, connecting thing. Not really, because I think we have so many other underlying issues around it or layers around it that it's hard to kind of fully get there. Let's say there's someone who's listening right now and they are just like, okay, that's it. I need to know myself sexually, but I have no idea where to even begin. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
What would be initial tips that you would give to them on how to start exploring themselves or knowing their own sexuality?
Uh, I would say to start with your own body. That's always going to be the first place. What is your perspective, your attitude towards your body? Are you mean to it? And what I mean by that is, are you constantly judging yourself? Are you constantly saying that you hate this about yourself? You hate that part about yourself? You don't like being touched? you have a reaction, I would literally say start with yourself, because that is the source, right? And so if I, for example, were recommending to a client a way to get more in touch or more connected with their body, I would say, you could start by practicing touch. It doesn't have to be sexual. It can be touching, putting on lotion. It can be washing your hair. It can be doing little things that we do all the time, except we don't really pay attention to it. Find those spots that feel good, find those body parts that, maybe before there was a lot of shame around, but you enjoy. Like I had someone once reach out and say, I feel so much shame because my breasts are really big and I don't like them. And I was sitting with them and I was like, this is where some of this comes up, right? Where we start to already see ourselves a very certain way, and like it's already not, I don't like it, it's gross, it's whatever. I always say start there. How can you appreciate these parts of yourself that are yours? Because only then will you be able to actually enjoy pleasure, because you'll be able to connect with your own body. You'll be able to feel good about your own body. And we have to also consider that a lot of times when folks experience anxiety around sex, it's usually because of thoughts that are coming in. Am I performing well? Am I looking okay? Am I, is this feel good? What is this liquid coming out? Like I said, a lot of things that we don't know because we don't talk about it, we don't explore it. And so the first thing I would say, get to know your body, get to really engage with yourself, with touch. Ask yourself questions, like what do I think about sex? How does it feel for me to be a sexual person? Or what are my thoughts around it? What are messages that I got that were not helpful, that made me feel bad? And what are other alternatives, right, that can allow me to explore? And so it is sequential, right? It's never going to be like one day I wake up and, oh my gosh, everything feels great, I love my body. No, it takes practice. The same way that we were bombarded with these messages constantly, we need to shift that. We need to restructure it and really allow ourselves to appreciate these parts of ourselves.
So beautifully said. I love how you said, if there's something about your body that you struggle with, you just don't like it, start there. Start there. Like, don't let that go. Find something you appreciate about it. Even if it's like, I'm making this up, but it's like, oh, I hate my hands. Okay, well, your hands perform a service for you. They pick everything up. Like, you can appreciate that you have hands, and there's always something you can find to appreciate, even if it's the usefulness of that body part. And yeah, I just think that is so beautiful. Just start in the areas that you are resisting for whatever reason and find that acceptance and find that sliver of love.
Yeah, I've left folks plenty of homework assignments where they're fun and explorative, and they're things that they do, except the difference is that now they're actually really paying attention. They're being present with their bodies and not just, doing things where it just feels automatic. I've had clients who are talking about hands, oil, massaging our hands, feeling good. What does that feel like? The sensation? Is there a smell that's coming out? Sensuality and all of these things, they're not just in actual sex acts, they're also in the way that we feel in our bodies and the way that we enjoy that touch. And this is from the get-go. Why do babies suck their thumbs? Why do babies do all these things when they're younger, when we're born? It's because we feel, and it feels good. There's stimulation that happens. Our whole body, our skin, for example, is full of nerves that can sense and feel. And we know what feels good. Like when we get a massage or someone hugs us, or we get to hold hands with someone that we care about, or when we're getting pleasure sexually as well, right? There's like a physical, mental, everything response to sex. I think the hard part is that a lot of times we've been kind of blocked from some of these things, right? It just becomes very, like I said, mechanical. It's like sex, like biological. It's to get pregnant. It's to, get a need met, versus seeing the full context of it.
If you could give one message to every single person in the world about human sexuality that you don't think the world is quite getting right now, what would that message be?
Ooh, that's a big
It's a
question.
big question, right?
It is because I mean, everyone is obviously, there's going to be a lot of variations. Like I said, culture, gender, age, all of these things that come up. And so people are going to have very different experiences. But I will say that the main thing I could say universally is that we are all human and we are all going to need connection, right? I mean, we even have like a diagnosis for people who cannot connect with others, right? When we talk about, personality disorders or things like that, because we're seeing that there's something happening that's impacting people. And so I think what I want to say is just like we're human. There is a reason why we are born and depend on people for survival. There is a reason why we connect and why we feel lonely and why we want to be seen. And so really getting to know ourselves, that is a big part of the foundational piece of how we're going to learn to love ourselves. And so my suggestion to people is to really focus not just on relationships with others, but also on your relationship with self, right? Because these things can work together. We learn from relationships all the time, and we also learn from ourselves. Self-love and love in relationships are both important. And so sexuality is just one dynamic of it. It's just one part of it. And so that is all part of human connection. So I would definitely encourage folks to really think about what their relationship to themselves is outside of all the voices, the noise, the societal stuff. You know, how do I see myself as a person in a world where there is a need for connection? There is a biological and survival aspect of connection in many forms. And it also includes a connection with ourselves.
I love that. I think the theme of the interview with you has been connect with yourself first, basically. Connect with yourself, know yourself, love yourself, start there. And then from there, it's easier to branch out into these other places. You may have just answered it with the last question, but my final question for you is how do we, no, my final question for you is what are our next steps in creating a more sexually healthy society?
I would say, honestly, for me, the biggest thing that has been coming up is really around decriminalizing things like sex work, and also working towards providing options for people that are safer and destigmatizing the concept behind sex that we're already having sex, right? These are transactional. This is also work. This is also something that helps a lot of people. Camming is another evolved version of that, right? Where now we're creating safer spaces, and interactions. And so I think that we need to really shift the way that we see sex. Just like for a long time, marijuana was seen as this horrible, evil kind of thing. And I mean, there was a whole war about it. And now we sell it in boutiques and like fancy places, and it's super highly taxed. And we've accepted that people use it. And, not everyone went in and the world didn't end because people said, okay, well, if some folks want to use it, go ahead. And, with sex work, it's the same thing. I think that I'm not talking about like human trafficking. That is an outcome of us criminalizing sex, that there are evil people that take advantage of these things. And so for me, when I think about how can we move ahead, is by decriminalizing sex work, decriminalizing the outcome of people who are seeking company and connection, providing spaces where they can do that. Japan has a bunch of like love hotels, right, that they've advertised where people can go and have interactions outside of the family, because in that culture they understand that sex is a need, that people want to have sex. And so that is a space where people can go do that. Here there's so much that just is stigmatized and shamed, and I think that we need to really reframe that perspective on sex, that if it's something that you don't want to engage in, you don't have to, right? We're not talking about people doing whatever on the street. We're talking about providing spaces and giving people an opportunity to be able to do this in safe ways. And so I think for now, camming is definitely a big one. It's definitely a safe space for people to be able to do work and provide for themselves and their families. A lot of people who do camming, from my experience, are also folks who are trying to get by and they're doing other things. This is an opportunity for them. It's like a job, right, that they can engage in, and it can be a safe space for them to do this, and then still aspire, right, to do other things. There's some folks, they love it and it's great and this is their thing, and I love that for them too. So I think we just need to really get off of our high horse and stop judging and criticizing and assuming everything, especially when it comes to sex.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time and for everything. And I look forward to, like I said, to sharing this too, and hopefully, we get lots of folks to watch.
Yes, I love it.